All frames, whether it's the floor, wall, or roof, are all made similarly. There are a bunch of parallel boards attached at their ends to two end boards. These pieces have different names depending on if they're the floor, wall, or roof. The floor is made of joists, which are the many parallel boards, and rim joists, which are the ends. These are usually at least 2x6 lumber. Walls are perpendicular to floors. The parallel boards are called studs, and the top and bottom ends are top and bottom plates. Typically, these are 2x4 lumber, but could be 2x6 for strength or insulation purposes. The roof is on top of the walls and is at an angle to the walls. The parallel boards are called rafters. The end board that is in the middle of the building is called the ridge board. The other board would be considered fascia and is sometimes not present. It doesn't support much load. The ends of the rafters are cut at angles. The angle depends on the pitch or angle of the roof. Depending on the construction, bird's mouth cuts could be made in the rafters so they sit nicely on the top of the walls. Other times, metal hardware is used. Wooden structural framing calls for walls to be 16 inches on center and roofs to be 24 inches on center. But why measure on center? Because pieces of plywood like this, which are 8 feet long, need to have bearing on half of a stud. And if we put the stud on the side of 8 feet, there'll be nothing for this plywood to sit on. But if we mark it and then put the stud on the center of 8 feet, or every 16 inches, then the plywood has something to attach to. So that's why we measure on center. But why dimensions of 16 inches and 24 inches? It's because the sheet goods like plywood and drywall come in sizes of 4 foot by 8 foot. In inches, that's 48 inches and 96 inches, both of which are multiples of 16. That means if you have a wall framed 16 inches on center, you can attach plywood end to end or side to side, and the edges will always meet on the middle of a stud. Because the pattern of 16 inches on center will always match up with the pattern of 48 inches or 96 inches repeated. Here's something that could seem like a mistake. If you attach studs 16 inches on center, measuring from the edge of your top plate, and then place your plywood flush to the first edge, which seems logical for a starting piece, the far edge will end up with no bearing on the stud to attach to. Why is this? It's because we're marking assuming that every sheet will attach on center to a stud. By starting the sheet flush with the first edge, it scoots off the center of the last stud it was meant to attach to. If you laid out your joist this way on a floor, Larry Hahn, in his book The Very Efficient Carpenter, says it's okay to lay the plywood down on the center of your first stud, and it won't change the structural integrity of the building. But if you want to avoid leaving this gap, here's how to mark out stud, joist, and rafter spacing with the tape measure. Most tape measures have easy markings to read at every 16 inches. Here these two have red boxes, and then here they are at 32 inches. The 24-inch markings, they're typically not marked. 4 feet happens to be a multiple of 16, so it is marked. But back here at 24, they figure it's easy enough for you to count by 2 feet in inches. Measuring from your plate edge, come to each 16-inch mark, come back 3/4 of an inch, make a mark which will mark the edge of your stud, and then make a line or an X on the side of the line where the stud will sit. Notice how 16-inch marks the center of where the stud will be. You'll do that at every 16-inch point. So here at 32, come back 3/4 of an inch, make a mark, and then make a line or an X on the side that the stud will sit. You're effectively taking the stud pattern as a whole, the pattern where they're 16 inches on center apart, and shifting the whole thing to the left by 3/4 of an inch, or half the width of a stud. This gives the end of the plywood the bearing it needs to attach properly, and it's okay to have a slightly narrower stud spacing at the beginning. Here's a mock-up of a wall, just to show you how the measurements work out. From the edge of the plate, here the stud is right on center, and here's the 3/4 inch back mark. Same thing with the second one, and the third one, and the fourth, and so on. See all the marks on the left side of the stud. I marked where the stud should go, and the 16 on center mark runs on the center of the stud. If you ever need to splice 2 top plates together, make sure the splice lands on top of a stud, and then from each side, toenail 2 nails diagonally from the top plate into the top of the stud. The same goes for this sill plate. The top plate above should be the same length. If your walls end up a length that isn't a multiple of 16, it's okay to add an extra stud. Here's some extra thoughts that I figured were better written down than made a video about. Feel free to pause and read them if you like. I made this video after building my first building, which was a 10-foot by 20-foot shed. I paid attention to all the questions I had that books and other YouTube videos didn't answer, as well as included mistakes I made and insights I had. I plan to make more videos from my beginner's perspective to hopefully make your project less confusing than mine was.